Welcome to today's RUC People. I'm delighted to be joined by Rees, one of our newest members here at RUC. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you very much.
So, Lauren, tell us a little bit about how you found your way to RUC.
Wow. Okay, so I'm actually part of the Earlham family. So we came en masse from Rosebank Methodist. Moira is my mother and is part of this congregation. And James and Roz are my brother and sister-in-law. I think during COVID, our families found it difficult to keep worshipping at Rosebank Methodist. They didn't have an online service. And also, my children had not been able to get involved in a youth group at Rosebank, even pre-COVID, because there was nothing on offer for teenagers. And although Hannah was a teenager and Daniel not yet, he was also really outgrowing the Sunday school there. So post-COVID, you know, the church has been trying to develop itself again, and there still isn't really anything on offer. So James and Roz actually initiated looking for another church, and they were very involved at Rosebank Methodist. In fact, when Chris, my husband, when we got married, he said he's marrying into the Methodist mafia. That's how involved the Earlham family were at Rosebank Methodist over decades. You know, my parents joined the church back in the 50s. So, yes, you know, James and Rose started attending services, and then Chris and I joined, and yeah, I just felt this is a church where we know we can belong.
Great. And feeling good so far?
Absolutely. In fact, it's just been wonderful to see how the whole family, you know, my immediate family, have just enjoyed and found a space here. So initially, Daniel was maybe a little bit reluctant to join the Holy Circus, but he's now embraced that and has enjoyed being part of that group. And Hannah enjoys being in the service. And Chris has found community here, which I don't think he found to the same extent at Rosebank Methodist.
So tell us a little bit more about your family.
Yes. So I have, Chris and I were married in 2004. We met at the end of 2002 here in Cape Town. Chris is a clinical psychologist. I'm a nurse, more a nurse educator now. And we have two children, Hannah, who's in matric, turning 18 this year, and Daniel, who's in grade 9, turning 15. Yes, and we live in Westerford Road, Newlands, Rondebosch. So Chris had bought the house many years ago and have been incredibly privileged to live very close to both schools. When Daniel was in primary school, he went to Saks and he could walk. And now they're both at Westerford, which is literally just a block away. So, yeah,
great.
That's our family.
So take us back a bit. Tell us where you were born, where you grew up, and your family of origin.
Yes, sure. Okay, so it sounds very pedestrian that I grew up in Rosebank in Cape Town, and my mother still lives in the house where I was born.
Wow.
So she and my dad moved there in the early 1960s. And after my father died in 2001, James and Roz moved in with her. And that's really worked well. So they're an extended family living together. I went to Oakhurst Primary School, which is here in Rondebosch, and then on to Rustenburg Girls High School. So very much, born and bred and grew up in Cape Town.
And at school, how were your school years? Were you a keen student? What kind of kid were you?
Well, I'm the last born, so in fact, James and I are twins, and I think I'm 15 minutes older than him, so maybe not the last born. But I have two older brothers, Sean, who's 6 years older, and Grant, who's 4 years older. Sean has lived in the States since the mid-1980s, and Grant lives here in Pinelands. They went to Rondebosch Prep and High School, and I think, James was always more confident as a child and more engaging. I was quite shy. And although I wouldn't say I was childish, but I was a little bit of a late developer. So I think it was good we were in different primary schools, but I probably lived a little bit in his shadow, in that, if we were together at Sunday school, he would probably be the one to answer the questions more quickly. So I was very young for my year at Oakhurst. In fact, I think my parents wanted me to go to Rustenburg Junior School, and they had said, well, actually, I think your daughter needs to mature a little bit more, and because they couldn't send my brother 1 year ahead of me, James, they found a smaller school, and so it did work well for me, and I was happy there, and I did manage to perform, adequately, academically. I think I was definitely above average, but I always retrospectively think that perhaps if I had been just maybe a year later in going to school, I would have had a little bit more confidence and maybe applied myself better. But I have no regrets. I had a good school journey. And
nursing, how did that come to pass? Did you grow up wanting to be a nurse?
No, in fact, it's quite interesting. Looking at my niece Amy Earlham, who's also in this church, I, in my sort of early high school years, was passionate about dance and had joined the Cape Town, it was the UCT Ballet School back then. So I was dancing about 4 times a week, and I really had thought I'd love to become a professional ballerina. But I'd started dancing quite late, and it was very competitive. And basically, I was too old to do the exams that were required if one wanted to become a professional ballerina. But I don't have any regrets, because I think I sort of early in my high school years realized I love to serve. We would do these, what are your spiritual gifts at church? Because we had a very active youth group at Rosebank Methodist back in the day when I was growing up there. And, people would say, you've got the gift of helps. And then I would go at school. I think I developed a social conscience quite young. We had the school Netherby, which involved meeting on a Sunday afternoon as a youth group with other young people. And I remember one of the talks was about rich Christians in an age of hunger. It was a book, I forget the author now, but that really struck a chord, because I thought we actually not that wealthy. Our family was very much middle class. We weren't upper class. But I don't think I had developed a political conscience and realized that actually we were very privileged. And friends of mine who went to Rustenburg High School, we complain about it being quite sort of Victorian at the time, quite formal, but yet I look back and I think, we had the best of education that was on offer at the time, being white young people. So I started to go to, there were different service organizations. I did some voluntary work with one-to-one, where you go and help people who have mental disabilities like Down syndrome. I'd go and help on a Sunday afternoon, or at I've forgotten the name, but it's just down Klipfontein Road. There was an elderly residential home, and I went to help there. And then I also visited Shawco. Ivan Toms had started the clinic with Di Hewitson, because Di Hewitson was involved with the school Netherby. So I think that's how I may have got to visit New Crossroads. And for me, going into those shacks and for the first time seeing how people live in South Africa, how the majority of people lived, and suddenly realizing, we have a different life altogether that is very privileged. So I think it was soon after that an interest in nursing developed. That's my rather circuitous route to your question about nursing.
And was that sort of during your school years?
Yes, I would say it was from when I realized in about grade 11, standard 9, that ballet wasn't going to be my career. I started to, show an interest in the health professions, and I had an opportunity to actually visit ill people through our Rosebank Methodist Friday evening group. We went to visit the ill patients at Groote Schuur Hospital, and I think that's really what ignited the interest, and why I pursued that.
So you did matric, and then did you go straight to nursing school? Or?
Yes. So I actually, again, I feel incredibly privileged. I had done physical science as a subject. I chose that in grade 10, standard 8, and thankfully for me, because the BSc nursing program at UCT, which really was one of the best at the time, expected you not to have life sciences, biology, but physics, maths. And so I was able to go into that program.
So at UCT? At
UCT. It was a 4-year undergraduate degree with nursing, general nursing, and midwifery. So, I qualified mid-80s.
Right. And the university years, were you living at home? Were you living in Rees?
I actually lived the first 2 years I was in the nurses' home, which was, it's now a university residence, but it's on Hospital Bend, so just behind the old Groote Schuur Hospital. And at that time, we were still nursing patients in the old Groote Schuur Hospital. So, give a perspective of, it was a long time ago. And yet, I mean, the segregation was so obvious, because when I visited the hospital with the youth group, we had been able to go into the so-called coloured wards. But as a nurse, as a white nurse, I only was able to nurse the white patients. So we were on the one side of the hospital, and the coloured patients, Black African patients, were being nursed by nurses of colour.
That must have been very weird.
It was very odd. It really was. And And what was interesting was UCT was still quite, it wasn't very diverse at the time. But we did have 1 or 2 nurses of colour on our program, but our program was only about 15 nurses. But we had a lot of, so Karina's Nursing College, we were in Clarendon, and Karina's Nursing College was actually a college for diploma nurses, but the white diploma nurses. So I think the diploma nurses from Nikomalan, as it was, up Klipfontein Road, they would come and nurse the patients in the other, the coloured and Black African wards.
And so, having studied nursing and thought, this is the direction I want to go, did it actually resonate and think, this is right for me? And can you give us a sense of how your career as a nurse evolved?
Absolutely. So your question about living in Rees, so I lived there for 2 years, and then I actually moved back home for the last 2 years of nursing. And just because I think, they needed place for nurses coming from out of Cape Town. And
you're living in Rosebank.
Exactly. And also by then I was fortunate because our neighbour we were given a stipend. So even though it was very little, I was one of those few university students that was actually being paid while I studied, not as a bursary, but as a salary. So I was able to buy a little car, second-hand car, so I had my own transport. But I got very involved in the Student Christian Association at UCT, and I found those very formative years because it was interdenominational, and it very much was a Christian organization. Yes, it was still segregated. The Student Christian Organization was the alternative for people of color, not on UCT campus, because at that time there were so few people of color, but those that were of color did join SCA. So, things by the late 80s were starting to sort of get a little more blurred, thankfully. And but there was a real sense of exploring our faith within a socio-political terrain. So I think, also some of the friends I made through SCA were having to think very carefully about a national service, and really, some were of pacifist, thinking. And so I got quite involved in some of the rallies, UDF and the End Conscription campaign. And then towards, it was at the end of my degree, but when I was doing my first year, I worked for 1.5 years at Red Cross Children's Hospital, and I really enjoyed my pediatric block while I was in my degree nursing program, and decided that I wanted to move into nursing children. So my first post as a registered nurse was at Red Cross Children's Hospital, and after about 1.5 years, I did a diploma in community health nursing science through the Cape Technikon. And at that time, a whole group of us that had been in SCA together moved into a commune that was actually, we called ourselves the Mustard Seed Community in Woodstock. And that was also very formative, because we had people, some of the postgrad students, mostly, a few black men, and 2 teachers, a coloured woman and man, were able to join that community. So we started to really engage about culture, about, beliefs, and at that time it was very unusual, especially to live together. I think we were actually flouting the the Group Areas Act because it was the late 80s. But yeah, I was in that community for 2 years, and really, yeah, grew a lot in my faith, explored. We looked at the cost of discipleship, Bonhoeffer, we
Cheap grace and all that.
Yeah, all of that. So and just supporting people in their decisions about doing an alternative to conscription. So, you know, some actually did alternative service, and yeah, so it was a very, very good time just for me to also get a sense of what is my calling in terms of living as a nurse in South Africa. And yeah, so from there my brother James had actually done what's called a Student Christian Association missions program, a 6-month, they called it SCAMP. And he went to work at Bethesda Hospital in northern KwaZulu-Natal. Now, you know, Steve Reed and Janet Giddy, part of this congregation, they were medical doctors there. And I subsequently worked there as well. So I visited the hospital with him and decided that I want to go and work in community health. So a few years later, I went up to work as the only non-Zulu speaking nurse at Mossveld Hospital in Ingwavuma.
Wow.
So that was in 1991, after I'd finished my diploma in community health nursing science, and I had a gap year where I travelled with my friend Alison, and then my brother James joined us for part of the year. And we did a little bit of nanny work in London, probably not legally, because at that time we were still banned from working as young South Africans overseas. But we needed to earn some money to be able to travel. So yeah, and then I went and worked as a nurse in the rural hospital, and
that must have been quite something.
It was an amazing experience, and I think has really also given me a much better sense of my calling, in that I was immersed clinically in having to, as a registered nurse, run the outpatient department. So I had done this incredible 1-month course while doing the diploma in community health nursing science at Red Cross with Dr. Joe Ireland and a nurse tutor called Daphne Huguenot. They actually wrote a book called Pediatric Primary Health Care. That became like my Bible, because I was the one having to actually consult. So when people came into outpatients with minor ailments and injuries, their children, I would need to actually assess, diagnose and treat. And then later went and worked in the mobile clinics, which were nurse-led. So I'd lead a team and we'd go onto the Makatini flats and literally go to these little rondavels or wooden structures and have 60, 80 patients coming through and doing vaccination, all the preventive and promotive health, and then also treating those with minor ailments and injuries and referring them back to the hospital if they needed to be seen by the doctors. I also had to work night duty as the nurse in charge of the whole hospital, which meant conducting deliveries, which was terrifying because I'd done about 8 months of midwifery as part of my training. And I wouldn't say I was a very experienced midwife, but
thrown in the deep end.
I was thrown in the deep end, and you get on with it. And those women are incredibly resilient and just, they just managed to make it easy, my work easy, because they're so, they're just able to get into the right position for giving birth, and just so patient with us midwives that maybe didn't have all the skills.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how long did you spend in KZN?
I was there for almost 2 years.
Right.
And although I embraced the rural life, and I loved opportunities to explore, it's a beautiful part of the country. And, the game reserves nearby, and Cozy Bay, and snorkeling, and it really was beautiful. But I think being a single person, and it's quite a trans-centric community, and I made good friends amongst the Zulu nurses, but we had the language barrier, even though I did do a course in Zulu, a Zulu intensive course, so that I could speak some Zulu. I decided to move up to Johannesburg and do my diploma in pediatric nursing science, because I knew then that I wanted to nurse children. And so a new chapter started in Johannesburg, and
And for how long were you in Joburg?
I was there actually 7 years, but I had a year also in the UK where I did a 8-week course with John Stott, the great theologian, at called The Christian in the Modern World. Yes, absolutely, in Oxford Street, London. Also wanted the opportunity to work at that time I could then actually work as a nurse in the UK. This was in 1996, 1997, so I worked in Cambridge in the pediatric wards. I even had a stint of nursing the theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking.
Wow.
So that was a wonderful opportunity.
From rural KZN to Cambridge.
Absolutely. But I think what informed, I always had this missionary zeal, but having spent a year in the UK, and a lot of my friends from South Africa were actually leaving the country at that time, but I always felt this is where I belong, in South Africa. And I think I went through a period in Johannesburg where I thought, am I stimulated enough in nursing patients, providing care, or should I consider studying medicine? And I knew I could get some credits, but in the end, I actually took the right route, I think, because I was very inspired by the family-centred care approach to nursing children in the UK. And when I came back to Johannesburg, I registered for a master's in nursing education and decided that I think I can make more of a difference in caring for the carers. So actually facilitating nurses being able to care more effectively for patients. And so in my MSc in nursing education at Wits University, my dissertation was looking at family-centred care and the perceptions of nurses and nurse educators in the pediatric nursing field to family-centred care, which was quite a new concept then, but has really taken off as a central tenet of children's nursing, especially in the South African and African context. Yeah.
So this is all as a single person.
As a single person,
and then in the early 2000s, your life changed a bit, I gather, when you met Chris.
Yes. So I think I look back and I think I was probably not a very happily single person, and always had a yearning to be, you know, in partnership, and to have children. So, but I think I had I'd become a Christian very young. I was 9 when I went on a SU camp, and I think I always had a very, Christianity, or my relationship with God, was always central to my life growing up. And I had some quite sort of rigid expectations. I wouldn't say I was fundamental, but, in terms of my values, I was quite not a risk taker. And so I sort of found with relationships, it had to, there was a bit of a perfectionism in the sense that the person had to fit these certain criteria, and I was never attracted to somebody who was about making money. Somebody who had a heart for service, a heart for people, as I did. And so, I think it took me a long time to actually get into a serious long-term relationship.
Find someone who ticked all those boxes.
Yeah, in fact, I'm not sure if Chris does, but maybe I changed over the years as well. And so I actually had gone back after my master's. I went back to the rural hospital environment, so the neighbouring hospital, Bethesda, and worked in the nursing school also as the only non-Zulu speaker, but I wanted to actually teach nurses, having done my master's in nursing education. So that also veered me away from children's nursing. But after a few years there, actually I'd met Chris in the December of 2002 here in Cape Town when I'd come on holiday to Cape Town. But I had already been thinking that by the end of 2003, I would return to Cape Town. My dad had died, and I just felt, my mum getting older. I'm the only daughter, and I just felt I wanted to be closer to her and to family. And so it actually worked out quite well that I met Chris, and, he was very ardent, so I decided, so we had quite a hard, essentially our whole courtship, for want of a better word, was long distance, because I am a committed person. When I commit to something, I commit fully, and I told the team at Bethesda Hospital that I would be there until the end of 2003. And but because of my age and because we were wanting children, we married fairly shortly after I returned to Cape Town. So end of January 2004.
Wonderful.
When I was already 38 and a half. So
so at that point you had children. You've mentioned before you've got 2 children, a daughter and a son. How did that harmonise with your nursing
my calling?
And did you manage to combine the two? Did you take a break? How did that all work out?
Okay, yeah. So I think I am grateful that I was able to be at home with my children. So that was intentional. I mean, we did have to make financial sacrifices, but I also think you need to walk the talk. And I had done my studies in family-centered care, and I decided that, if I'm going to have children, I want to be there, be present to them, see them take their first steps. So I embraced and I enjoyed those early years, but I actually was working like 4 different jobs in the time I was pregnant with Hannah. You know, I'd worked at UCT in clinical skills for medical students when I came back to Cape Town. And for that first year of our marriage, I was working at the New Groote Hospital. And then I was asked to come and work a little bit in the Department of Pediatrics and Child Health in children's nursing practice. So but I think I was working too hard because Hannah was born a little bit premature, 3 weeks early, and I literally I never had any maternity leave as such. And then I was at home with her for about 2 years, a year and a half. But actually what happened was I contracted pulmonary tuberculosis, TB. And I think I'd been actually masking that throughout the pregnancy. I probably contracted it at Bethesda Hospital because at the time I was there in the early 2000s, it was during the epicenter of the HIV pandemic and before antiretrovirals were rolled out. And tragically, I mean, I was listening to Dr. Harrison's interview and him speaking about his work and the tragedy of some of my colleagues and some of the nursing students that I was teaching who succumbed to AIDS, you know, during my tenure as a nurse tutor in the Bethesda Nursing School. So yes, I had TB and Hannah had to also be treated and I had to stop breastfeeding her and be admitted to hospital because they weren't sure what I had. I didn't fit the profile at that point, so they thought it was a staph pneumonia or something or other. So yeah, I think I slowly went back to helping at Red Cross Children's Hospital with clinical assessment in the pediatric nursing program, and then was able to get this wonderful job where I was working 15 to 18 hours a week, you know, teaching pediatric nurses. And until Daniel came along, and then it was all on contract. So I could take the time out when I had my children. And after about 2 years of being at home with Daniel, I then went back and was part-time all through the primary school education. Yeah, but then had quite a traumatic retrenchment. So that was very painful. That happened in 2019 and was probably directly as a result of the Fees Must Fall and Roads Must Fall movement. And I understand, you know, the university had to engage in staff cutbacks and austerity, and because I had prioritized my children and was working part-time, even though I'd come into the post, the first person actually in the Child Nurse Practice Initiative with all the prerequisite qualifications, skills and experience and a good performance record. But, you know, they had only part-time contract posts when I started, I couldn't work full-time. So I was retrenched and I had always thought this is where I belong, this is where I want to be until I retire. And I felt I still had a lot to contribute. So it's been quite a journey subsequent to my retrenchment, but God has used me where I've had to go.
And so what are you doing now?
So actually after I was retrenched, I went back into the private healthcare sector. I needed to work and I was actually just ready to start working full-time. You know, Chris is I mean, he still works, but yeah, we both need to be working, and I needed to work full-time because we still have children to get through all their education. I joined a private healthcare sector and worked as a clinical trainer, and then after about 10 months I moved to the college, and that was sort of during the pandemic. So it was a very tough few years. The nursing students were really at the end of their tether because their training had been suspended, and other private colleges had continued online. So I sort of came into the college with them just about to go on strike, and also new to that part of nursing, that course, and having to be the educator. I became like their mother to 17 students, and then also having to do a lot of administration and management. So yeah, but it was very rewarding. I learned a lot of new skills, and all 2 groups that I taught have finished and are now registered nurses. But at the end of January last year, there were no new students to teach because of delay with accreditation of the new programs by the South African Nursing Council. And I just felt the business ethos of the private healthcare sector, it doesn't really resonate with me. And then a colleague who I'd worked with many years ago, she's head of division in nursing and midwifery at UCT, and she approached me and said, would I consider coming back on contract? So I'm now back at UCT since February last year. Back in the old Groote Hospital where I worked as a nurse, student nurse, and I'm loving being back in the academic environment and considering embarking on my PhD.
Wow, new adventure.
A new adventure indeed.
So fascinating to hear the story, and you describing your nursing as a calling. Obviously, your Christian faith and servant spirit, desire to make a difference, informing a lot of that. And I get the sense also it must have been tough having been part of Rosebank Methodist almost from childhood to leave and to come to a new church. So thanks for sharing some of that journey. Interested just to hear a bit about outside of a sense of calling and service. What does fun look like for you?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question, because I'll never forget one of my SCA friends. He was saying recently, we didn't have much fun when we were at university because I think we were so busy trying to solve the
many problems of
the problems in society. But I also think they were extraordinary times, and I think they did call on one to have to really look seriously at where is our country going, and we need to move forward into a more inclusive and into freedom actually. And but I think I've also always been quite a serious person by nature, and so I've only actually in the last few years really started to actually say it's fine to have fun, and it's good to have fun, and actually you don't always have to be serving others and doing everything for, not that you can't have fun when you're serving others, but so I think really I'm on a journey of more self-love, self-care, more nurturing my interests and hobbies. So I do love hiking. I always did, even when I was in Johannesburg and I was part of the Forest Town Methodist. We had a wonderful hiking club, and I would so getting back into. I love being outdoors and getting back into running, which is something that's always come quite naturally. And as I said in our welcome to the congregation, I still have a goal to do a full marathon. I've only ever done halves. And so I run every morning a little bit in the forest. And I think that's quite a meditative space for me as well, because I'm not very good at just being still. And I think I've always been a little bit too, maybe there's a bit of attention deficit that I have, but yeah, mindfulness doesn't come too easily. So I think I'm learning more about just having fun in the present and being more present than sort of doing something fun and then always thinking, oh, I should actually be doing that bit of work, or that sense of I should be doing something more meaningful. So yeah, taking like my children, we went to the day before they went back to school, we went off to. We love going to Dale Brook for them to have a swim, going to the tidal pool. Yeah, I would love to get back into. I always enjoyed photography, but I haven't really had opportunities to really explore that interest, and getting back into reading, which is something that I enjoy but don't make enough time for. And then just being with friends. I'm not the life and soul of a party. I've never been an incredibly, party goer. But I get a lot of energy from being with a small group of friends, walking in the forest with a friend every Saturday morning. We were at school together. And yeah, just being with the family and enjoying. Yeah, being present.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It's been great to hear more of your story and get a sense of your passion to make a difference, particularly through nursing, but also in being part of a church and you and your family.
Loving being here.
Yeah, well, no, we've really appreciated your contribution so far.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you for making the time to hear my story.